This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Good afternoon, and welcome to PHRC Speaks Fair Housing Forward. I'm your host, Brittany Mellinger, and I serve as the Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. In this show, we explore all things housing with the experts, advocates, and community leaders who are working to expand access to housing. Today, we'll be discussing how mediation can be a tool for resolving complaints at PHRC. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show my colleagues Mila Pilz and Chris Young. Mila Pilz serves as a civil rights mediator with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Mediator Pilz works out of the central office in Harrisburg and mediates employment, public accommodation, housing, education, and commercial property cases that are referred from the PHRC regional offices. Mediator Pilz came to PHRC after working in the field of community mediation and restorative practices. Pilz is a mediator, facilitator, and trainer who is trained in general, divorce, custody, and elder mediation, as well as restorative justice, victim-offender conferencing, and circle dialogues. As a graduate of the University of Denver, Pilz has a Master's of Arts degree in Conflict Resolution and Master of Arts degree in International and Intercultural Communication. Pilz earned her Bachelor's of Arts degrees in Communication Studies and in Mass Communications from Bloomsburg University. Pilz serves as a member of the Board of Directors for the PA Council of Mediators. Chris Young is a mediator at the PHRC. Prior to becoming a mediator, Chris Young spent 5 years as an investigator in the Harrisburg Regional Office, investigating employment cases. He was also an intake investigator, processing discrimination questionnaires and drafting complaints for 18 months. Before working at the PHRC, Chris managed a small business, and this background, along with his investigative knowledge, allows him to facilitate effective settlement agreements between the parties during the mediation sessions that he conducts. So welcome, Mila and Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we all have a story on how we got to our current work and vocation. Would you each be willing to share your journey to your current work?
Sure. It feels like I had about 1,000 jobs before I worked at the PHRC, but number is probably closer to 100. And I take a little bit from each of those vocations I had to my work as a mediator, first as an investigator. So the ones that I think impact me the most or help me most as a mediator are the years I spent as a bill collector or managing a collections office, the time I spent as a personal trainer, and also the time I spent as a bouncer in a CD nightclub, all of which gave me an appreciation for conflict and the opportunity that it represents, and how normally it's better to work it out, talk it out, rather than fight it out. I was an investigator for, as you said earlier, 6 or 7 years in the commission, so I have that investigative background. I also was a respondent almost 30 years ago in a case, so I know what it's like from that position to deal with a complaint. So I'm able to take all of that into my mediations and try to help the parties see that I recognize both sides where they're coming from and help them resolve the case on their own.
Awesome.
And I actually like to say I started being a mediator at a very young age. I was a peer mediator in elementary school, trained by volunteers from the former Lancaster Mediation Center. But then, as you said, I was really focused in communication. But then I realized communication is really the heart of a lot of conflict. And so I went on to add conflict resolution to my studies. And I think after realizing that the two really work hand in hand together, and in addition to growing up in Lancaster County and seeing the wide diversity of cultures there, might not think about it, but between the Amish and Mennonite culture all the way down to a thriving downtown city, there is really a big mix of people. And then when I later in life studied abroad and lived abroad for a few years, I realized that there's a lot of stereotypes and misnomers, and to really work out those conflicts, we need to help people be able to communicate. And so really wanted to kind of combine my passions of communication and conflict resolution and cultures and social justice. So I came back to the area, worked in communication in the Community Mediation Center, dealing with mediation or restorative justice, and then was lucky enough to fall into the work of the PHRC and really appreciate getting to do this work on a larger scale and a state level.
I'd like to start our conversation by asking you to share what mediation is, Mila.
Yeah, so mediation is an alternative dispute resolution process in which a neutral third party, so in this case, Chris and I as the mediators, basically our role is to facilitate communication, the discussion, the negotiations between the parties, where they are able to have the opportunity to have a confidential setting. So mediation is confidential, protected by Pennsylvania state statute. And they're able to explore possible resolutions, really get a chance to hear their underlying interests and the issues that they have, and be able to have an opportunity to resolve or come to solutions that may make more sense for them than having the case go back to investigation or to a court hearing. So it's really a great opportunity for them to have their voice heard and save some time in the process and have some ownership and be able to have some creative solutions.
Great.
I was going to say,
Chris.
those are great examples of what mediation is, and I'd say what it isn't is it's different than the investigative process at the PHRC. The investigative process is focused on proving something that happened in the past, or a hearing is focused on proving something or coming to a finding. That's not mediation. So, as counterintuitive as it may seem, the parties aren't there to prove their case to the other side or to the mediators. They're to talk it out to see if there's an agreement to be had that makes more sense than going back to the battle and fighting it out to prove one side or the other was right.
Yeah, I imagine that's a really different dynamic in like finding proof versus working to find consensus.
Correct. So the mediator is neutral. We're not there to make a judgment or a decision for the parties.
Gotcha. And I know you mentioned that mediation is confidential and protected by state statute, so I know we can't talk about specifics, but would you be able to share some generalities about what types of cases you often see in mediation settings at PHRC?
So the types of cases we mediate at the PHRC are cases that already have a complaint filed at the PHRC. So mainly, the majority of cases we mediate are employment cases, but we also do public accommodation, education, and housing and commercial property. And just as a reminder, anytime there is discrimination is illegal in Pennsylvania, and so that includes all the protected classes. So that is discrimination based on race, color, religious creed, ancestry, age, which is 40 and above, sex, national origin, familial status, that's only in housing cases, disability, the use, handling, or training of support or guide animals for disability, and retaliation. For the cases, they can be multiple charges, meaning you can check more than one of those boxes. So often, for example, in employment cases, it can be for race, sex, and retaliation, for example. So they can...
And they really run the gambit of the types of cases that are filed at the PHRC. All of those types of cases can end up in mediation. So you could have the person that asking for a reasonable accommodation for his disability, who later is retaliated against and fired. They've come to us. Or the person that isn't hired because of their race, or is fired because of their gender. Or it really runs the gambit of the kinds of cases that we can see in mediation. There's all kinds of ways, unfortunately, that people are discriminating against one another, and we're here to actually help them work it out if we can.
Yeah. Chris, could you talk a little bit more specifically about some of the issues that might come up in housing cases?
Well, there's so many issues in housing, and it's if you look at Maslow's scale of needs, it's the most basic need, right? Shelter. So it's such an urgent issue for folks, and it seems like most of the issues that we see arise from a lack of knowledge, just not understanding what your obligations are, either as a landlord or as a tenant. It can go, of course, multiple ways. So that's what we see a lot of. And most of that is coming from emotional support animals, the ESAs or the support service animals. So people, for example, not knowing that you're not supposed to charge pet fees for those, or maybe refusing to rent to someone because you have a no pet policy, but not realizing they have an emotional support animal. So a lot of it is misunderstandings, not knowing the law, or not knowing your obligations. And like Mila said, the communication is a big part of that. So oftentimes as a mediator, you're translating too, trying to help two parties who are trying to communicate but not understanding each other, even though they're speaking the same language, right?
It doesn't always feel like we are, right?
Definitely.
Mila, could you share a little bit more about some of the barriers that parties face in a mediation setting when they're trying to come to a resolution?
Some of the biggest barriers to coming to a resolution in mediation are approaching it as if you're in a trial or a courtroom, and thinking that it has to be, a win or lose, kind of, instead of seeing it as something where you can be flexible and creative. So by that I mean coming in with the mentality of it has to be this and only this is the resolution. You really need to be able to have some flexibility and negotiate and know that you're not going to get exactly what you want at the beginning, and that's okay. That you're going. It's good to be flexible because then you're going to get more in the long run. And it can be helpful to be prepared to ask for more than you want at the beginning, knowing that that will give you more options and more ability to be creative. I think it also helps to kind of keep your expectations in check, but also know what you really want to get out of it at the end. So what are your negotiables and your non-negotiables? But also keeping your emotions in check so that you're making the right decisions for the right reasons. And I think another barrier is, what are you doing? Are you making the decisions for the right reasons? And by that I mean, are you doing this for you or for a bigger overall cause or for kind of a community need? And I say that because sometimes people really want to make it a win for a kind of a bigger, for everybody in their collective group, and that can be really difficult because it's putting a lot of pressure and expectations on something. So I think the barrier really has to be being flexible and appropriate, and really understanding the process of what mediation is. By that I mean knowing that if you're not willing to approach it as something where there is give and take, then it's probably not going to be the process for you.
Gotcha. Chris, could you share if there's any types of cases that would not be appropriate for mediation at PHRC?
Well, that's a tough one to answer because as a mediator, I always want to say any case could be mediated. There's not a type that I don't like. It's really, it really comes down to the specifics of the case and really the specifics of the person too, because two people could go through the same case and one could be primed for mediation, one could not be. So like Mila was saying, the parties approach it with a win or lose attitude, or if they think they're out for revenge or out for, they want to be the representative, the hero of the entire protected class, the other side's not going to have that perspective. So that case isn't going to be a good vehicle for mediation. They're going to be focused on this one case. The one side is going to be focused on an entire larger issue. So those are obstacles and maybe cases that wouldn't be appropriate. There's some cases that we don't take in mediation, like if there's egregious, physical harm. Those are cases that we just don't touch in mediation because we don't think they're appropriate.
We also don't take cases that are neighbor to neighbor or ones with direct evidence. So we really just want to make sure that they're, overall looking for the safety and appropriateness for everyone's best interest.
Yeah, that makes sense. So at PHRC, we're striving to be a trauma-informed organization, and experiencing discrimination can be a really traumatic experience for someone who's been in a situation. And I would imagine that it would be really challenging to come into a conversation about that as well. What are elements of trauma-informed practices that you bring into mediation?
No, I really love that question because it is, by the time people get to mediation, a lot of times people choose mediation because they want to get it over with. They want the whole experience to be put behind them, and they choose it because they want to save the time. They instead of having the case go back to investigation or court and take even more time. And so we are mindful of that when scheduling the mediation. And ways in which we are mindful of that are trying to be clear about expectations up front, trying to give as much information as we can, including what to expect in the process. So we try to schedule pre-mediation phone calls with both parties and to explain, what the process entails. We also try to, as much as possible, make sure everyone knows who will be in attendance so they can be prepared for that. Additionally, we like to give options. So we do most of the mediations virtually these days. And we like to have people do it through video so we can also see their nonverbals. But we don't enforce that. So meaning, sometimes to be trauma-informed, it means allowing people to keep their camera off so they don't have to, experience all of that. I think another great way we do that is if both parties are represented by counsel, if they have their attorneys. Another option is, trying to do attorney caucuses, meaning it would be just us as the mediator and both attorneys, and that often is a way to kind of save face or allow the complainant or the respondent to not have to re-experience kind of the trauma and seeing the other party, but also having to hear all those details again and kind of have to retell their story. So that's another way to kind of keep that in mind. But I think also just really being cognizant of the wording that we use to try to avoid trigger words, and just being very aware of their nonverbals if they do have their camera on, so acknowledging when they may need a break, those type of things.
Yeah, I'm sure that clear communication, giving them flexibility and options, that's all really helpful as they're navigating this process. I'm glad you brought up having an attorney in the room or in the process, because, Chris, my next question is going to be about situations where there might be power imbalances. Are there situations when you're coming into a mediation with both parties and there feels like there's a power imbalance, whether that's a landlord and a tenant engaging together, or when one party has an attorney and another doesn't? How do you make sure that both parties have an equal voice in the process? So
that's a good question. It happens pretty much in every conflict. One side is going to feel like there's an imbalance of power. So a good way that I try to eliminate that right from the get-go is to remind both parties that mediation is about them. It's not the Chris Young show. It's about each of them. So each of them is the star of the show and has the power. Not their attorneys, but the parties, because they're the ones who are going to be deciding how the underlying conflict gets resolved. So setting some ground rules ahead of time, letting them know it's not a trial, it's not a hearing, and as weird as it may seem, even though you're in conflict, we're all on the same side at the mediation session. We're trying to solve a puzzle. We're trying to answer that one question, and that is there an agreement that makes more sense than me essentially sending you two back to your neutral corners where you come out swinging, So it's a way where it's a collaborative effort then, rather than our head-to-head. So I think setting that tone in the beginning really helps the parties. And also, like Mila said, we can use caucus too, which is a fancy word for a semi-private, extra private meeting with the two parties, right? When you're meeting with just them separately, then they know that it's a safe space there too. They can communicate with you. And when you're in that room, then they are the star of the show. So there is no power imbalance then. And they recognize, hey, I'm in charge here. I'm going to be the one that says yes or no at the end of the day. So does it happen? Yeah, there are some times when the session comes and there's 6 people on one side and one person there. But the virtual sessions seem to come somewhat mitigate that because the person's in their own home, comfortable, their domain. Yeah. So it's not in a conference room where they're looking at 6 people staring right at them. Back in the old days, when you were doing more meetings face to face, a circular table like this, or a little bit bigger than this, if you're having 6 people, that goes a long way towards, shifting that imbalance of power too, rather than having people staring at each other from side to side. So those are some ways that you can kind of eliminate that.
Yeah, I'm sure that physical space element, whether it's virtual or in person, there's a lot of things you can do to make someone feel more comfortable and in control. Now, I want to be clear to our viewers that mediation services at PHRC are just for people who have filed complaints and engaged in the mediation process. But some of our viewers might be interested in services to resolve other types of disputes. Are there any outside resources, Mila, that you could recommend for folks who might be looking for more information on mediation?
Definitely. Mediation can be used for a variety of disputes, everything from divorce and custody to landlord and tenant, neighbor, business, all sorts. So I recommend checking out the Pennsylvania Council of Mediators. They have a full directory on their website that includes throughout the state. There are several community mediation centers located throughout the state, and they're all listed on there, along with private or individual mediators. There's also the Pennsylvania Bar Association and the county bar associations. There are plenty of attorneys who also serve as mediators, so you can look them up there. And the Association of Conflict Resolution is national, but they can, I'm sure, have some resources on their website as well.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those resources so folks can get more information. Now, I know this must be incredibly difficult work on a daily basis, engaging in those challenging conversations between different parties. What keeps you going in the face of these really challenging days?
Well, the fact that the people need us, I think that's what keeps me going. It's every thank you or every email that you get that's saying, that's so appreciative of coming to a resolution. That really keeps me going, and it's kind of like, it's very rewarding, to do that, to help the people, to help them find their own way through the conflict, rather than someone, in a black robe picking a winner or loser. They get to decide, and seeing that closure and that's so rewarding, to me.
Yeah, I'd add to that. It is very empowering to be there for people when they need you the most, when they need that help, and it's empowering for them because it's their voice getting heard. It's kind of I would like to say even more empowering for people than their day in court, because this is their day in mediation, so they're having more of their voice be heard. They have more of their choice in decision making, and so to help kind of facilitate that and kind of guide them through the process. And along those same lines, getting that thank you email, getting a thank you card in the mail, knowing you've made a difference, especially for someone at a difficult time, is really helpful to get you through those days when you are reading some pretty traumatic stories. As we do read through these complaints, it does make it worth it when you help people get throughout the process.
Well, Chris and Mila, thank you so much for taking the time for coming on the show, and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of residents of the Commonwealth. I really enjoyed the chance to talk with you this afternoon and hear a little bit more about your work. I'd like to also thank our viewers for spending their afternoon learning with us. So if you believe that you've experienced housing discrimination or would like to learn more about housing protections in Pennsylvania, give us a call at PHRC's Fair Housing Line, which is 855-866-5718. You can also find us on our website, which is on the screen, www.pa.gov/en/agencies/PHRC. You can also keep up with our work on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And remember, our communities are stronger when everyone has a place to call home. We'll see you next time.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.